Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, the tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small Adventure Travel Podcast. So excited to have all of you back here. And today we're here with Lisa Jansen. She's in New Zealand. She is an author, a digital nomad, and just kind of is reimagining things for a lot of people and sharing her story as she goes. She's currently in New Zealand and really has spent quite a bit of time traveling around New Zealand. And look forward to hearing more about that. Lisa, welcome to the show. So happy to have you here.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Jason. Really looking forward to having a chat.
Yeah, this is great. So you actually came to my attention. Someone else that I'd reach out to said, "Oh, I've got this lady named Lisa. She's been just doing her own thing in New Zealand and has probably more information about New Zealand than I could ever capture in my lifetime." And so New Zealand's just a fascinating place. I have spent some time there, fell in love with the place, and so look forward to hearing about that. But honestly, more importantly, I'm more interested in your story, just as how does people do that, right? Because I know I'm a digital nomad. I've been traveling full time for 2 years, and I know that with my family and people in my life, they're gonna think I'm a little crazy. So I suspect you probably had some of the same feedback. So before you were a digital nomad, what were you doing?
Yeah, so actually quite a sort of normal life. So long story short, I grew up in Germany. I came to New Zealand when I was 22, about 17 years ago now, which tells you how old I am. So came to New Zealand.
Nobody's counting. I'm not counting.
It was supposed to be for just 2 semesters study abroad. As you do, lots of people go, overseas during their studies. But I ended up staying, and originally I sort of ended up extending. So I'm going to do another semester, and then I'm going to do another year. And then, before you know it, New Zealand become home. And so, very much, other than that, very normal life. I got a degree in management and international business from the University of Auckland. I had worked part-time in marketing roles throughout my studies. And so when I finished uni, I decided that I was going to pursue a career in marketing. So I got, a typical sort of entry-level marketing executive job, and then worked my way up in that company for a few years, and then to a different company. And so just, very much on that normal sort of career path, was doing really well, definitely someone I'm very passionate about my work and was doing pretty well. And then, all of that led to me being 33, having done really well in my career, but kind of just asking myself those big questions, what's next? What am I doing with my life? What's going to make me happy? What do I want to achieve? And of course, being 33, looking around me, like all my friends were getting married, having kids, buying houses, really focused on progressing their careers. And even though I sort of, I thought that was beautiful and I love seeing it happen for them, and I love all the kids. For them. But yeah, it just wasn't, I didn't feel drawn to that. And at the time, it wasn't that I was like, oh, I definitely don't want that. It was more like, it's like, actually, what else is there? Like, what can you do with your life if you don't want to follow that path? And so that kind of then sort of snowballed. And originally, I decided to just take a summer off from work. And so I made that decision pretty much spur of the moment. So I bought a camper van, and I said, I'm going to take a summer off, and I'm going to travel around New Zealand. And I'm just going to figure out, who am I when I'm not working, 40, 50 hours a week in an office? and that really sort of busy life in the city where you get constantly bombarded with all these messages around, who you should be and what you should want. And yeah, it's just, I'm going to see what happens when I step out of that. And that, summer traveling around in New Zealand has now turned into 6 years traveling around New Zealand. And yeah, so here we are.
I love that it's kind of a repeat, right? Because when you went to New Zealand the first time, is I'll be here, a few months, whatever.
Yeah.
And then it changes.
Yeah.
But what's great about that is just being open to the possibilities, right?
Totally.
Sometimes we think we have to have this plan, and you kind of touched on it with career, family, owning the right house, the right car, that people have their lives all planned out. And there's something really special to be said for anybody that's able to say, you know what, I don't know where this is going to go, but I'm just feeling drawn to it. Was there a particular moment? I was just actually speaking with somebody that was, kind of told me his specific moment of when he's like, okay, it was kind of the same thing. He's like doing the normal job. And then it's like, okay, this is not it. I belong. He was describing looking, he's in a tall skyrise in Santiago doing banking and finance stuff. And he said he looked out the window and saw some guy down walking on the street with shorts, flip flops, a backpack, and a surfboard strapped to the back. And he's like, he said he basically walked right to his boss's office and gave notice. Do you remember some specific moments like that just really like, okay, this is it, I got to do it now, or I'm not going to do it, or anything like that come up for you?
It wasn't that specific moment that sort of made the decision, but there was a very specific moment that sort of kickstarted it all for me. And that was, I have an amazing group of friends. We're all into, water sports and nature. And so we used to a lot more than we do now, but go away on weekends together and, have these awesome like fun and adventure and activity weekends. And so for Easter that year, back in 2017, we went away, and it was sort of that weekend where it really like hit home for me, like how much things were changing and how they were all on this specific path in life. And it's sort of, it felt a bit like the kids were starting to outnumber us, and the energy and feeling around the group was changing. And so that was like for me the moment that made me sort of pause and like look at it as, okay, clearly things are changing. We're no longer a bunch of independent singles just doing whatever the hell we want. And what does that mean for me? Do I want to follow that path? And if I do, then what does that look like? Or what else? So I do remember that moment very specifically. And then from there, it really just snowballed. And then the decision to, buy the camper van and live and travel in it for a while, it was really, I have no idea where it came from. People ask me this a lot, and a lot of them sort of seem to expect some kind of story of, a friend was doing it, or, I saw something on Instagram or whatever, but I don't know, I have no idea. It was just like, but it was one of those ideas where, I had the idea and it just felt right. I just it turned from an idea to a plan within like 2 minutes, it was just right. That was it. I knew that's what I needed to do. And so from there, everything just kind of fell into place, and I was just on a mission. Like nothing was going to stop me. I was going to make this happen. I knew that, that's what I had to do. Yeah.
Did you, sometimes when we have a moment like that, we realize we get to change our group, our tribe, our friends, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we maintain these relationships. Maybe nobody else understands us, but we still maintain those relationships. I'm curious, were you able to, did you have a desire to find a new tribe, to find, like when you're in your camper van, were you actively like, I need to find other people that have this same thing going on in their heads? What was that like?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. So I'm someone who's very good at doing stuff on her own, right? I'm just like one of those people who's like perfectly happy and comfortable to do just about anything on my own. And a lot of the time actually prefers to do things on her own, right? So I didn't necessarily go looking for that. And also, even though my friends and I were on different paths, they're still my friends, and they're still a big part of my life and mean a lot to me. But So I didn't necessarily go looking for a different tribe or different people, but what happened, what was really cool, and I've, since heard some similar stories from other people, is once I stepped out of that like so-called normal life and did something a bit different, and especially once it sort of became a longer term thing and not just this, thing that I do for a summer, I started to connect to people, some that I met in person, or you meet online, like thanks to social media, and I was writing a blog and all that stuff. So you started connecting with people from all over the world, and I started to realize that, hey, I'm not the only one who feels that way, because for a while there, for me, it was literally felt like I was the only person who didn't want to do the settle down, have kids, kind of life. And that was sort of felt really lonely. But then you take yourself out of that and you put yourself in the environment you want to be in, and you do the things you want to do. And then I realized, actually, there's this real awesome global community that has, such similar values and goals than I have. And I've connected with so many amazing people over the years. And it's just been amazing, it makes you feel more connected and valued. And so it's been a huge part of the journey. Absolutely.
I get that completely. It completely resonates. I'm a little older than you are, and I started my full-time journey a couple of years ago, just traveling full-time. And I think the last few years before I started traveling full-time, I was like, honestly, I was like, what is wrong with me? I'll be vulnerable. I was like, what is wrong with me? Why is everybody else around me is like, Jason, what is your problem? Why are you so restless? Why, like, can't you just be happy? Like, you're not supposed to be happy. It's a job. It's not supposed to be enjoyable. You're just supposed to do it. And why don't you want to buy a house? Why don't you want to, live in Arizona for the rest of your life? And I honestly, there were moments I was just like, man, something's wrong. I'm just like, I need a therapist or something. And then once I did it and I made the move and I started seeing other people that had done the same thing, and they seemed like normal people. They didn't seem like they needed a therapist. They seemed happy. I was like, oh, and then all of a sudden I was happy. And so I can resonate with that. I almost like I didn't know that I needed that. But as I traveled more, especially the full time, because I've always traveled. I've worked in tourism for a long time. And I always knew that was something that really had a strong draw for me. And I would lead a group, I'd go with a group, I'd go somewhere, but then I'd come home. And when you start traveling full time, it's like, okay, this is interesting and I like it. And I don't feel weird. And the people I meet don't think I'm weird because they're doing the same thing. And it's so definitely kind of that, okay, I found my tribe, and I still run into people because as I travel, I run into people that live wherever I'm traveling that, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I get the question, well, where do you live? Well, that's a complicated, that's a little hard, and for most people that like, it's just a simple question. Like, where do you live? Oh, they think it's simple. And I'm like, and I'm just struggling. I'm like, how do I describe this in a way that doesn't sound like I'm just going to say I'm homeless? Actually, funny story. I was back visiting. My son lives in Arizona, and I spend a lot of time with him. He's been able to travel with me, and I go back and visit him in Arizona periodically. And I was back there at the beginning of the school year, and he had an event at the school, and with kind of get to know the teachers type of thing. And his mom and I, we still get along great, and we're there with him. And his teachers started chatting with us and asked some questions. And somehow we got to the question of, oh, well, where do you live? Because I think my son had said, oh, my dad travels a lot. And she said, well, where do you live? And I just real kind of off the cuff said, oh, I'm pretty much homeless. And my son with like the look of terror on his eyes. And he looked at me, said, Dad, explain yourself. I was like, oh, yeah, from his perspective, me telling his teacher that I'm homeless probably is not, how he wants to start the school year. So we had to have that, that conversation. And it was a reminder that what I think is cool, maybe not everybody else thinks is cool. So I get that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And So you told me last time we spoke, you did the camper for quite a while, and
Yeah.
then you've kind of transitioned. You'd mentioned that you're taking a different approach now. So tell us about that. What prompted you to do that, and what is the difference between living in a camper that's moving around and doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, so last year, after 4.5 years in the camper van traveling around, I decided to sell the camper, and it was again a little bit sort of a spur of the moment ish decision. I sound like a very spontaneous person now. I'm
I
really
love it.
not. I just seem to like occasionally make these sort of spontaneous decisions.
Decisions.
Um,
I'm going to go
now,
live in a van. That's a big decision. That's not like
there
I
were
think I'm going to have pizza tonight.
now, there were a number of things. The van was getting old and needed a lot of repairs, and that was always really stressful because if it's when it's your home and your vehicle, and then it's at the workshop for who knows how long. It's a really stressful situation. And also the pandemic wasn't easy. New Zealand had a very strict and very, very hard response to it, including, we weren't allowed to travel even within New Zealand for two, very long stints. And so just, a few things sort of happened that kind of just, yeah, I just got to a point where I felt like, you know what, I think it's time for change.
Right.
Um, And at the time, I thought I wanted to settle down. And looking back now, I think I actually realized that it was, other people and other influences sort of telling me, that's what I should want. And it just sort of, I want to change. And then that just seemed like the logical thing to do. It's like, okay, yeah, so you've done the wild and crazy thing now, now you settle down and you stay put. But then that didn't really happen. And I sort of, didn't really want to in the end. And so what happened is that house sitting opportunities came up. So I had done a bit of house sitting while I was traveling in the van occasionally, especially over winter. It was nice sometimes to get out of the van and have a house for a while. And then when I sold the van, I thought I'll just house sit for a bit around Auckland and just figure out, where I maybe want to rent or what I want to do. But then, house sitting opportunities just kept coming up. And before I knew it, I had, was booked out for 6 months. And then, another sort of 3 months. And so now it's been a year and sort of 2 months since I sold the van. And I've basically been house sitting full time. Initially, stayed close to Auckland, but then was like, oh, this is actually just another great way to travel. So then I started to, look for house sits all over the country and sort of been, moving around every, the longest one I've done this winter. So in New Zealand, so we're coming into summer now. All right, our seasons are the other way around. So just this recent winter, I was in Nelson for 15 weeks, which is the longest I've been anywhere in 6 years.
Nelson's
so
pretty
that was
great.
a bit of
I have been there. I really like Nelson.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was great, but at the end, even at the end of that, I was definitely ready to move on. I loved Nelson, and it was great to sort of have that, stability for 15 months. But by the end of that, I was like, oh, yeah, I think it's time to move on. And so most of the time I move every, 4 to 6 weeks is like my sweet spot. That's sort of perfect for me. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer, but yeah, so that's what I'm doing now.
That's cool. I get that. When you were saying, sometimes I think, well, maybe I should settle down, but is that really what I want? And what came up for me when I heard you saying that was just even in the last couple of years, there's times when I start to think, oh, I really like it here. Maybe I should find a little longer term type of Airbnb, or I could stay here. And then I will catch myself. I'm like subconsciously, I'll catch myself looking at my phone, looking at plane tickets. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. There's
Yeah,
something going on here. If I'm still
it's
looking at plane tickets, trying to figure out where I want to go next, why am I also thinking maybe I want to stop? But you're right. There is pressure for me anyway. I've experienced that with people, even people back home are like, you should settle down somewhere. Not necessarily that they think I should go back to Arizona, but
yeah,
they are
but
so ingrained in their story that they don't understand. Well, do you really want to just keep moving around? Or you meet
yeah,
people
but
that maybe you enjoy and you're like, oh, maybe I want to stay around and spend time getting to know these people more.
Mm.
But then there's also, you realize, well, or are they just kind of projecting their own stories on me, that insecurity around, oh, am I telling people I'm homeless, or am I sick of describing, because I'm a single guy, I'm out traveling, I meet people, and there's some stories actually, and I think you can relate as well. There's some stories about what should a man be doing, what should a woman be doing
Mm.
in society, what is the expectation. So the guy, the story I think some people have is the guy that just picks up and keeps traveling, moving around. What's he doing?
Mm.
What's wrong with him? Why does he have and I'll be completely open and honest in this is, I've got a 17-year-old son back in the US.
Mm.
So who's that guy that's out traveling the world when his son's in the US? Well, there's the other side of it is that my son also spent a summer with me traveling around Central America, and he spent
Yeah.
a summer with me traveling around Southeast Asia. And I'm on WhatsApp video calls with him almost every day. My relationship with him has never been better because I'm happy.
Yeah.
He's excited. He thinks it's cool that I'm doing, as long as I don't tell his teacher I'm homeless. He thinks it's cool. And and then I can imagine the scenario as a woman.
Yeah.
It's like probably even more so with a woman. It's like, what is wrong with you? Don't you like guys? Don't you like people? Don't you like relationships? What is up with that? And I wasn't
Yeah.
planning to get into this, but I suspect it's something that you've experienced. You wrote a book, right? And
Yeah.
I haven't
Yeah.
had an opportunity to read the book, but I have a feeling there's probably something in there about being an independent woman that's doing your own thing, and maybe some of the societal resistance you picked up along the way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, lots of things to unpack there. So yeah. So the book tells that whole story. Starting. Basically, the book starts with that weekend that I talked about earlier, back in 2017, and asking myself all those questions, and then deciding to travel in the van and sort of, really. And one of the great things for me is like through the journey, sometimes through just my own thoughts and experiences or people I met, I think I sort of got a really interesting perspective on life and society, and a lot of those sort of norms and expectations, and was kind of like in a unique position to really look at that almost like from the outside, because I wasn't in it anymore. So it's definitely a lot of that going on. I do have to say I was very lucky in that the people around me were always supportive of what I was doing. So it's very rare for me that I had to deal with real sort of criticism or doubts. Usually it's from strangers. It's usually like strangers who'd be like, oh, girl, what you're doing. Whereas my friends and my family have always been very, very supportive, and so that's great. And yeah, but I think the other thing I wanted to say is I think this isn't for everyone. Like I think a lot of people, and I think one of the reasons why some people have a hard time sort of understanding this lifestyle and what we're doing is because it wouldn't work for them. Because they would feel restless, and they do really value and appreciate having that home and that familiar environment. And I think so important to I'm really big on do what's right for you. Like my book is called Life Done Differently, and so is my blog, and obviously that's sort of about living in a van and traveling and hot sitting, but also I always say, like, ultimately for me, like, life done differently means do life your way.
Yes.
Like, get to know yourself, figure out what you want and what makes you happy, and then do that, like, regardless of what anyone else is doing. And if you're someone who's happiest with that sort of traditional life, and the 2.5 kids and the picket fence and the golden retriever, then do that, and
Yeah.
be happy with it. And so I think it's really important to remember, like, we're all different, and different things work for us.
I absolutely agree, because I think
Yeah.
that is an important distinction. Is
Mm.
when I say I can't sit still, I want to go travel, people don't understand me. That doesn't mean that I'm criticizing the person that doesn't
Mm.
want to do that. I get it. I've been
Yeah.
surrounded by people that prefer not to do what I'm doing for most of my life, and I have no ill feelings at all. It's like, that's awesome. I'm happy that you're happy. I
Yeah.
couldn't be, you know, I'm not going to lie. There were times I wished that I could.
Uh,
you know,
yeah, me too.
just,
And I
you
do
know,
think it changes too, right? Because I do have to say, like, I'm loving my lifestyle, but I do think, and I tend to change my mind a lot at the moment about what I'm going to do next. But I do think that there will come a time for me where I will, settle down or stay put somewhere for a while. And the main reason for me would be, and I've actually heard a lot of nomads talk about this when you get to the sort of 5, 6, 7 year stage. It's the community piece, right? Like
mhm,
when you're constantly on the move. Like, I've met amazing people, but it is really hard to actually form connections and
mhm,
community because by nature, nomads are always on the move, always on the go. And little things like I'm near Christchurch at the moment, which is New Zealand's second biggest city, and I've got two friends here, and I was catching up with them, and they were telling me how one's doing a like a class, I think it was woodworking, or some like course like that, and the other one was telling me about like groups and things, dragon boat racing that she's doing. And it's those sort of things where sometimes I think it's like, oh, actually, I do miss that. I do miss being in a community and getting involved with these sort of things. I miss having that coffee shop, where you walk in and they know your name and they know how you like your coffee, just that sort of
yeah,
like feeling.
yeah,
So I do miss it. And I think that is the biggest downside of the nomadic lifestyle. And for me anyway. And so that's, I can definitely see myself get to a point where the desire to have that, at least for a while, will outweigh the desire to travel and keep moving.
yeah.
When that'll be is a different question, but yeah.
Well, and we all, it's different stages of life. Some of us,
Totally.
and that's not necessarily an aging. It's not like, oh, well, when you're older, you're going to be responsible because it might work the other way around. I'd
Mm,
say probably in some regards, it worked the other way around for me. Um,
definitely.
and I would say the biggest mistake, not the biggest mistake I made, but the biggest mistake that I think I could see people making is that selling all your stuff, telling everybody, I'm going to go travel the world for 5 years. You sell
Yeah.
all your stuff, you just, maybe you not terminate some relationships, but people do. I mean, realistically. And they're just so convinced that that's what it is that they make it it's like they make it very hard to change their mind. And
Yeah.
I personally think that one of the best values of being a nomad and living this lifestyle is the ability to change your mind. So if you can maybe not burn all the bridges, and this is for anybody that's listening that's thinking this way, it's like maybe you don't really have to sell everything. Maybe you can hang on to your car and park it at your parents for a while. Um,
Yeah.
Maybe not tell everybody you're going to go for 5 years. Just say, you know what, I'm going to go for a few months
Yeah.
because I've met so many people and I've had a lot of conversations with people that were like, yep, I was going to do this forever. And then 6 months in, I was like crying in my Airbnb because I was so lonely, couldn't meet
Mm,
anybody, couldn't connect because I hadn't learned the language. It can be stressful. Living out of a
yeah.
suitcase can be incredibly stressful. And you don't know if it's for you until you've done it a little bit. So I just always tell people, just take a few months. Don't get rid of everything. Because then if you
Definitely.
want to go back, you can go back. You don't have to, feel like, oh, I'm so embarrassed. Because if you tell everybody you're going for a few years and then you come back after 6 months, some people
Yeah.
might feel like they failed on some level.
Yeah,
And
totally agree with you. And it's actually, when I sometimes get asked, what sort of tips or advice I would give someone who wants to kind of, maybe break free from the traditional life. And one of the things I tend to say is you start small. Like, one of
yeah,
the best things, because for me, like, even right from the beginning, I sort of had this idea in the back of my mind that it might be more than just the summer. But
mm-hmm,
by just saying it's just for a summer, it just de-risks the whole thing for myself and for everyone around me. And so I just kind of, say it's just for a summer. And if I'd hated it, I could have just gone back.
right.
And nothing's really would have been lost much. So that's definitely agree with that. Like, anyone sort of thinking about that, I just like start small, go for a few months and see if you like it.
And I think you'll get less resistance from the people around you as well.
Totally.
Because
Totally.
that resistance, because if you make the decision, I'm doing this, and you've got it in your head, you're going to do it for 5 years, and people around you think you're crazy, most people are going to come up with all kinds of validation, all kinds of reasoning and justification for why they're doing it. So they say all these things. I've always wanted to do this. It's so important to me. Da 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 da. To try and justify why they're doing it. And then 6 months in or a year in, and they're like, this is horrible. I'm lonely. What am I doing? But it's really hard if you've been trying to convince everybody else and yourself that this is a good choice. It's really hard to change directions at that point. And I suspect there's a lot of nomads out there that have been in it 2 or 3 years when in reality they knew like a year in that they'd made a mistake.
Maybe,
but they're too proud, or they've, they don't want to admit to their families that they don't want to feel like they were wrong. And if you just say, I'm going for 3 months, and then you come back, you don't have to admit you're wrong. You're just like,
so
I
true.
I was gone for 3 months. So
so true. And the whole lifestyle definitely gets sort of, romanticized quite a bit on, social media and other, people only share the best of it. And so it looks like this, endless vacation and fun and beach and parties. And there's just a lot more to it, right? So I think some people just go into it maybe with the, wrong expectations, or don't think about like how, that lifestyle fits with their personality and their values.
You're right. And on the flip side, if you just do 3 months and you go out there and you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is incredible. I'm so happy I did this. It's going to be much easier to then go to other people and say, you know what, I was only going to be 3, like you did. It was only going to be 3 months, but I'm having so much fun. Then you don't have to feel like you need to justify it. It's like, I'm happy. Just say, I'm happy. I'm doing it. I'm happy. I'm going to keep doing it. Yeah. And if people care about you and love you, they might not understand, but they're much more likely to say, well, okay, at least you tried it and you're not just running away, right? Because that's the thing I think a lot of people run into is like, I heard it. What are you running away from? Yeah. I'm like, I don't think I'm running. It didn't feel like running away, but then you start to question yourself, well, am I running away from something? So the short start is probably a good thing to do. Had you written any, were you writing before you decided to write your book? Have you written other books? What was that all about?
Yeah, so this was actually one of the sort of cool, unexpected things that happened on my journey. So I've always written in the sense that I've always had journals. Writing's always sort of been like my way of thinking and processing, and how I communicate the best. But I hadn't written any books, and it's always been, I think a lot of people can sort of relate to this, right? A lot of people say, like, I would love to write a book one day, right? So I used to be like that, and it always felt like something I might do when I'm retired, or like it just didn't, seem like, so I dreamed about it, but I never actually thought, I'd actually do it. And then I set up in my van, and I had like the most amazing first summer. It was just like adventure and, travel, and it was awesome. And then that summer sort of started to turn into autumn, and things slowed down a little bit. And, I started to travel a lot slower, and I started to really appreciate the having time, so the first summer was all about excitement, but then that in autumn, I really started to appreciate what it feels like to have time for things. At the time I was sort of working 15-ish hours a week, which, covered all my bills because living in a van is cheap. And so I just had time for things, and time to think, and, time to just like sit there and drink coffee and enjoy the view, those sort of things. And just really, really appreciated that. And I still say that is the most valuable like lesson I've learned from van life. It's the value of time, and how great it feels to have time and all that stuff. Anyway, so then, I was in this sort of really, amazing phase where, just ideas were flowing, and I was feeling really, like I had this real clarity. Like in the book, I describe it as, it felt like a fog had been lifted from my life that I didn't even know was there. So, I've before van life, I would have told you I'm like focused and I see things clearly and I'm productive, right? But then I was in this situation where all the stress and that crazy busy city life was removed, and all of a sudden I was like, man, this is what clarity is like, and like this is what
Yeah.
it's like to really be in the moment. And so then that kind of led to the idea for my first book, which is called One Size Does Not Fit All. And so talks about, the importance of getting to know yourself, understanding your personality and your values and your strengths and weaknesses, and then building a life plan and figuring out what makes you happy rather than listening to the often generic, headlines and research that says, people are happier when they're married, or people are happier when they own a dog, and, those sort of statements that are true for the majority, but when you look at the studies, it's often actually a fairly small majority. It's really more than 60%, right? Which means there's a huge chunk of people who, might love dogs, but are still happier without a dog. So that was kind of the first, the idea for the first book just sort of happened. And then I was just writing a book, I hadn't really planned to do that, but it was just one of those things that happened when I had the time and had that clarity. And then had an opportunity to write another one a couple of years later, and then now the newest one, which is called Life Done Differently, which is the memoir that tells the story of the whole journey, is the third one now.
I loved what you were saying about just different people. We have different things for whatever reason, and we can look at. I'm going to use the example of dogs. There's different breeds of dogs out there. And like, it's really easy for us to look and say, okay, well, golden retrievers are this way. Rat terriers are this way. Chihuahuas are this way. And we just kind of accept that different types of dogs have different things about them, different traits. They're all still dogs. They can all still intermingle and genetically all this stuff. But it's easy for us to see, oh, well, it's golden retriever. So of course they like to run out and grab things and bring it back to you. But when it comes to people, we just expect everybody to fit in the same box. And so you've got some people that just are, the types that need to travel. Maybe we can call them ADHD, whatever. We say, oh, well, this person's ADHD, can't get enough, can't sit still, needs a lot of stimulation. I'm not talking about you. I might be talking about me, but I'm not talking about you. But and instead of just accepting, oh, this person has different needs, different desires, different things they're looking for, it's like, how do we figure out how to make this person fit in, to sit in a school classroom for 6 to 8 hours a day so they can prepare to go work in a factory later on in life or whatever. And I'd read some people, just some things about like kind of the hunter gatherers as opposed to the agricultural type economy. Some people are better farmers, other people are better hunters. And the farmers are typically the types that are more likely to have that consistency and comfort and predictability and staying in one place. And a person that does well with staying in one place and doing the same thing every day does well in an agricultural type of economy. But the person that does well in the hunter-gatherer, where they want to go out looking for something in the woods and that uncertainty, it's really hard for them to sit there and harvest, tend to a crop or domesticated animals or whatever. And I thought that was pretty fascinating to look at it. And to just be able to accept that some people just need to kind of keep moving. And it doesn't mean that something's wrong with them. It just means that they're not a golden retriever. So I'm happy you brought that up. I want to read your books. That's I just talked to you like yesterday for the first, I think yesterday, day before. So I did not have a chance. I did not have a chance to prepare for this. And when I spoke with you, I knew immediately. I was like, okay, this is an adventure travel podcast. I'm interviewing a lot of tour operators about trips, about specific, go climb Mount Kilimanjaro, go scuba diving in the Pacific, that type of thing. And I think that somebody that, like yourself, that is just traveling full time. I mean, I suspect there's a lot of adventure travelers that would love to do what you're doing, because that's like the ultimate, adventure travel. You're not tied to you're not trying to fit it into, your Kilimanjaro trek in your, 1 month that you got vacation or your sabbatical or whatever. So that's why I really wanted to have you come onto the show, because I know there's people out there that are just like, oh man, love to just go live in a van down by the river, whatever jokes are around that. But I think it's cool. And one thing that came up in our conversation as well, because I asked you, is like, why New Zealand? Like, because some people travel worldwide, they put everything in a bag, and you chose to primarily really get to know New Zealand. And I asked you why, and you had a response that I just like, oh, duh, that was pretty obvious. So I'm going to ask you that again now that we have the benefit of me pushing the record button here a few minutes ago. So why New Zealand, and not in a different country every 4 or 5 weeks?
Yeah, good question. I get asked this a lot. There's a few reasons. The first one really is it's New Zealand. I mean, anyone who's ever been here or just like look at the pictures, it is the most amazing place in the world. I feel like I should get paid by Tourism New Zealand these days.
Yeah, by the way, this episode is sponsored by Tourism New Zealand. I need to reach out to them later and convince them to sponsor it, but thank you for bringing that up. But you're right, it is an amazing place.
Look, and what makes it like, it is an amazing country, full stop. What makes it like amazing for, van life or RV travel specifically is that you just have so much in a relatively small country. We've got the oceans, obviously, we've got the mountains, we've got lakes, we've got forests, so if you're like me and you love nature and the outdoors, then everything's here. And everything's sort of driving distance. You don't have to spend days crossing a desert or something, right? You just sort of drive a few hours down the road and then you've got the next sort of amazing spot. And, it's been almost 6 years for me now, and I still haven't seen everything that I want to see. There's still a few places I haven't been to. There's a lot of places I want to go back to. So that's a big part of it. I just love New Zealand. And but then the other part, and we talked about this yesterday when we caught up. So I'm really into sort of just being active in nature. So even right now I have a bike with me. I've got a stand-up paddleboard and a surfboard. I'm a kite surfer, so I've got 3 kites and a kiteboard and all of that. And I've got my hiking gear, and I love having all of that. And I love being just anywhere in the country and just having that opportunity to go on a bike ride or, take the paddleboard out or go hike up the mountain. And if I would start to go overseas, I'd have to, leave most of that behind. You can take sort of, maybe one, I could maybe take the kites, packed down. So I could take maybe 1 or 2 of those, but everything else would have to stay behind. And so that's actually, probably the biggest reason. It's just so convenient to, travel in New Zealand, just, everything fits in my car and I've got all the stuff with me. And I also have to say that, the third reason probably is that I do, even though I live this quite sort of, adventurous life, I guess for a lot of people, I am actually a creature of habit. And so I quite like, in a way, being in this, environment that feels familiar. So if I would, start to travel overseas a lot, I think I would feel overwhelmed quite quickly. All the, like, everything being so different and so new would be exciting for a few weeks. But I think permanently, I'm the sort of person where I would start to feel overwhelmed by that quite easily. But maybe I'll find out one day.
No, you seem very self-aware. I think that's important. And I think that's what you get out of traveling alone. Sometimes it's like things come up that really you got to look at, okay, why am I feeling this way about that? You're able to work through so much, because when you're with somebody else all the time, or you're in a work environment that's, it's so easy to distract yourself. But when you have time, like you said, I mean, if you feel like you've got enough time to sit down and write a book, you're processing stuff as you write, obviously. And if you don't write, if you're just not a writer, guess what? You're still going to process that stuff just differently. And you learn so much about yourself. Oh my gosh, I've learned so much in the last 2 years about myself. things that I
Yeah.
just never would have thought. I like if somebody had told me 2 years ago, Jason, you have this particular insecurity or this particular hang up or whatever, I'd be like, you don't know what you're talking about. And now I'm like, yeah, I could sit down and write a whole list. I meet
Yeah.
somebody, I'm single, I'm dating. It's actually a problem. I would not suggest this to anybody that's single trying to date. You can become so self-aware that like you think, oh, I
Yeah.
should just share with everybody I meet all of my little things that I've figured out the last 2 years. And most people think that's weird. Most people are
Yeah,
like,
it's too much too
whoa.
soon.
Like they haven't had 5 minutes alone. If they're
Yeah.
not travelers, they haven't had 5 minutes alone to really think about their hangups in, their whole life. And then you've got somebody like me shows up who's had an awful lot of time alone to think about stuff. And yeah,
Yeah.
you gotta balance that. Know your audience, right? As a writer, I
Yeah.
think you probably are ahead of me on that one. Maybe I should look at that. So anyway, fascinating stuff.
Don't
What
worry, I'm about the last person who's going to give anyone dating advice. So just
well
like, I'll clear that one.
in a previous life, I used to do that. I don't do it anymore because I realized I have too much stuff I got to figure out about myself to be trying to help anybody else see their way through it. But I've learned a lot. What is this? Because I have so many fond memories of New Zealand, and since you didn't grow up there, you probably still remember when you got there. What were those, two or three things that you just thought, wow, that's really weird coming from Germany. Do you remember anything that? Because I remember a couple things, but I wasn't there as long. So, what do you remember about New Zealand when you first got there? You thought that's weird that people might not expect anything.
Um, People go bare feet everywhere, in summer.
Okay,
Like in the supermarket, you can go bare feet in the supermarket.
nice.
Whereas, I did that in Germany once a few years ago. I was
Oh,
back in Germany in summer and I didn't think about it. And my sister was so embarrassed. And she's like, you can't do that.
yeah, I
Um,
get German
so
culture
that's,
is a little different, right? Yeah, I can see that.
yeah, that's
All right.
probably one thing. People, it's like lots of little things, people bring food. So if you get invited to, a barbecue or something at a friend's house, in Germany, and that's really all I can compare it to, right? But in Germany, if you would show up with food, it would sort of be considered a bit of a little bit insulting. It's like, oh, you don't think my cooking is good enough that you need to bring
You
your
brought your
own
own food.
food?
Oh, that's
Probably
interesting.
depends on like your circle as well, right? Whereas in New Zealand, if you bring food, like you can't show up empty-handed. You bring food
Uh-huh.
or you bring beers or something. So yeah, so it's
Mm-hmm.
those little things. Some of the accents quite funny. Like New Zealand's definitely got a bit of a unique accent, and not just accent but also like language, words like no worries and sweet as, and where in the beginning I was like, what the hell.
And
So yeah.
it's interesting you mentioned that because yesterday you and I had that conversation when you told me you're from Germany. It's to me, and I suspect to a lot of our listeners that haven't spent a lot of time in New Zealand, you sound absolutely Kiwi. Like I'm like anybody listening to this, like, yeah, she sounds like when you talk about accents, you have that accent. But you'd mentioned that Kiwis can tell that you're not
Yeah,
necessarily from
yeah,
there,
nah, they
but
know
you
right away.
sound and I spent maybe a total of a month there, and I can't tell the difference. So you're anyway.
Yeah.
Um, I remember one of the things that I thought was I don't know why I remember this, but I went into a convenience store or maybe a little grocery store, and they had a bag of chips that was like mint and honey chips, potato chips, mint and honey flavored potato chip. I thought that was so cool. I bought like 3 bags. I was driving somewhere, I ate like 3 bags as I'm driving down the road. It was I thought that was cool. And another thing I remember, just it was just different, is in Nelson. I went to this place. I don't remember even what the place was, but they had this little creek or something, and it was full of the eels.
Yeah,
And you could go and feed the eels, and
feed
they'd
them,
like
pet them.
climb up on the rocks, and you can almost, I think we were feeding them with our hands or something.
Yeah,
And it's just
yeah.
like there's just cool stuff there that
Quite a few
those are
places
lame
around New
examples, but
Zealand.
I
Yeah.
just thought it was cool. And then of course the scenery is just my goodness. If you had to live in one spot for a year in New Zealand, where would it be?
So right now, for the first time in like 6 years, I can actually answer that question. And
Yeah,
it'll
cool. What
change
is it?
again, but I could never
For
answer
now.
that question because there's just so many amazing places. But I was just very lucky. I was house sitting in a place called Port Levy, which is on the Banks Peninsula. So if you look at New Zealand's South Island, sort of probably 2/3 down, there's like a little peninsula that pokes out on the east coast. That's
Hmm.
called the Banks Peninsula. And I was house sitting there in this beautiful bay, green hills and then the ocean and, farmland and like a little settlement, sort of, probably like 2, 3 handful of houses. But it was just so beautiful and so peaceful. And that was, I was just like, oh, I just want to stay here. So right
Wow.
now, if, I had to go somewhere for a year, I'd want to go there and just, spend a year there. But yeah, but honestly, there's so many amazing places, and it's probably one of the reasons why I haven't settled down yet is because I don't know where I want to be because just way too many good options to choose from.
Got it. If someone was going to fly to New Zealand, rent a car, drive around for a month, first time to New Zealand, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, cool. So
And I know it
you
depends on what they
probably,
like, but
yeah,
just in
yeah.
general terms.
I'll just pull out some highlights and then people can just, make up their minds which they want to do. But most people fly into Auckland. So Auckland's New Zealand's biggest city, towards the top of the North Island. So from there, if you've got the time, definitely worthwhile going north to the Bay of Islands,
Mm.
and then Cape Ringo, which is, the very far north. Just really beautiful, lots of beautiful beaches and bays, and then you can come down on the west coast and you can stop at we've got the ancient trees. Here's like massive kauri trees.
Hmm.
That you can like drive through the forest there and visit those, and so that's sort of like
So you
north of
said it. What was
Auckland.
the name of that you said Cowley Trace?
Kauri with an
Cowley.
R, Kauri.
Okay. And what is
If you
trace?
Google
Help us out. Those that don't know the word trace, I think I know what
trees,
it is. Trees.
like the tree, as in like the green stuff that grows
Oh,
in the
oh,
forest.
I've heard of those. It's that Kiwi accent. All right. Did you say it
Sorry.
with a German accent? Okay, I gotcha. All right.
if you
Okay.
if you
Oh, curry
Google big,
trees. Curry
yeah, if you
trees. Of
yeah,
course, right?
if
Yeah.
you
That
Google
they use
big
in
tree
Indian
New
food.
Zealand, you'll see it.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
um, So that's like north of Auckland. And then from there, if anyone, I think if you come to New Zealand, you have to go and learn about the Maori culture. So the Maoris are the New Zealand and the original people of New Zealand. And we're actually very good these days in New Zealand to, value that and celebrate that. So Rotorua and the North Island is a great place to learn about the culture, and experience that. Lots of opportunities around, but, Rotorua is sort of the
Hmm.
capital of that.
Hmm.
And then through the center of the North Island is Tongariro National Park and the Tongariro Crossing, which is the volcano that Lord of the Rings made famous.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
some people might have that as a must see on their list. And then you just keep going south. I would say that if you love nature and beautiful scenery, you're probably going to enjoy the South Island more. Like the North Island takes it to the next level. And so on the South Island, like Nelson, so from Nelson, Abel Tasman National Park is just beautiful. It's great hiking there. And then you go either down the East Coast or the West Coast. Lots of little towns, and Kaikoura on the East Coast is famous for whale watching and swimming with dolphins and lots of seals. You got to watch
Hmm.
where you step. There's always so many seals around, and yeah, and then honestly, you just keep going south. The lakes, I really love Lake Tekapo and Lake Pukaki, which is sort of the center middle of the South Island.
Hmm.
Lake Pukaki is where Mount Cook is, our biggest mountain. So you've got these crazy blue, crystal clear lakes, and then the snow-capped mountains and green hills around it. So it's beautiful.
Nice.
And then you got to go to Queenstown. Queenstown is sort of, it's called the adventure capital of the world.
I
I
was
think it's
going to
just
ask you about that because there's something specific that when I was there, they said that it's where it started. It was like the first place that they did it. You know what I'm talking about?
bungee jumping.
Yeah, right. I
Yeah.
remember that. So I have bungee jumped before in the past. I did not bungee jump on when I went through there, but I stopped and watched them jump for a while. And yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
Have you done it?
And no, I haven't. I've done skydiving. I'm really scared of bungee jumping for some reason. That sort of that moment where the bungee is pulled and pulls you back. Something about that just doesn't sit right with me at
It's
all.
actually it's really freaky because if you don't think about it ahead of time, you jump and you're like, you expect to feel, when you get to the end of it, you expect to feel yourself stop. In your mind, you expect to feel yourself stop. What you don't realize is that as the cord, I guess, retracts and lifts you back up a little bit, you don't feel like you're going back up. You just feel like you've stopped. And then all of a sudden you feel yourself drop again. So you can imagine what goes through your head. You're like, okay, the cord, it caught me. It caught me. I'm safe. And then all of a sudden you're dropping again. And I remember the first time I did it, I was like, oh my goodness, it broke. So anybody that has not bungee jumped, when you do it, keep in mind that when you bounce, it's going to feel like you got to the end of the rope and then the rope broke. So just a bit of advice. We used to do it. My father is a hot air balloon pilot. We used to do it out of the balloon. The bungee jumping, and I hated it, but I had to do it because my brother, that competitive thing, he would get up on the side of the basket and do flips and all kinds of fancy tricks, and I was terrified. So, but I had to do it, and I still don't think I would enjoy doing that again. What about? There's also the kind of the Milford Sound area.
Yeah,
they're down around Fjordland. Have you? Yeah. There's a couple trucks there. Do you have any experience with those?
I haven't done. So there's the world famous Milford track, which is I think 5 days.
I think that
4 or 5 days.
Right. Yeah.
So I haven't done that, but I've done heaps of day trips, and it's like it's one of those like places that just feels like it's out of this world. Especially for people who maybe usually like live in cities or don't live in places like New Zealand where we have this abundance of beautiful nature. You kind of just get to somewhere like Milford Sound and Fjordland, and it's just blows your mind. The kind of nature and the the impact and power nature can have is really amazing. So Milford Sound definitely. You just honestly, I can keep going.
No, I know. I was thinking, you definitely need to get sponsored by the New Zealand
Tourism New Zealand.
For those of you listening to this, you're not able to see Lisa's face. Maybe you're seeing this on YouTube at some point, but if you're listening to the podcast, I got to tell you, she's all lit up. And I can't help but think you've been traveling around, like you've lived there for a long time. You've been traveling around extensively for years now, and you're still so excited about it. So it's like, I almost feel silly when I ask that question. Why only New Zealand? Because I can tell you've got the passion. And you're right. There's so much cool stuff to see. The people are amazing. So I'm really happy that you came on to share that with us. Where can we find your book or your books? Because are they all still available?
Yeah. So the books are just about everywhere you buy your books. Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Apple Books, Kobo, whatever. So just look there. The newest one's called Life Done Differently. The first one is One Size Does Not Fit All. The middle one, which is called The Nomad's Ultimate Guide to New Zealand, is more of a travel guide, but that one was written very much for the domestic market. So I don't actually know if that's available internationally, but if you come visit New Zealand, you can go to the store and get it.
there we go.
So all of them wherever you get your books. And my website is just lifedonedifferently.com. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram. Always love connecting with other travelers from all over the world. So, please do get in touch, reach out.
That's wonderful. And I will have a link to your website in the show notes.
Cool.
So awesome. They can connect with you through there and all your different channels. The last question I have that I can think of at the moment, and I remember my experience actually going to New Zealand and getting a rental car like immediately. And I know a lot of people that live in the States have an issue with it's driving on the left side of the road. So what can you say to because I think New Zealand's an amazing place to go and do your own thing. There's great tour operators, no doubt. I'm sure you could book a tour.
Yeah.
But I think New Zealand just lends itself so well to just showing up and driving from town to town. I never felt like I had to book anything very far ahead of time. But I also realize some people are like immediately are going to say, I can't do that because they drive on the other side of the road. But presumably when you went there from Germany, you had the same experience. I'm sure you've had other experiences around that. So what would you tell people that are worried about that?
Yeah, I would say, it's actually because you sit on the other side of the car as well, right? So it doesn't feel as weird as you might think it does. I often find the weirdest thing is the indicator and the windscreen wipers are the other way around. So in the beginning, you might, when you indicate, you turn
it on your windshield wipers every time you go to make a turn.
It happens to me when I'm back in Germany now. But I would say that the roads in New Zealand are a bit different. Like we have a lot of places where roads are still relatively narrow and windy, and if you go really remote, gravel roads. So be prepared for things to take longer than you think, and then I'm sure it'll be fine. But yeah, I think it's some people like look at the distances and think like, oh, I can drive that in 2 hours, but because our roads aren't 6-lane highways, right. But single road, we still have a lot of single lane bridges, that tells you kind of a lot. So take your time, take it easy.
And I thought of it, another tip on the driving thing, if you're the passenger, I've done this a few times now, it's always really awkward. But if you're the passenger, if you're from the US or another place where you drive on the other side, on the right side of the road, on the left side of the road, right? I'm totally confused now. But anyway, if you're sitting as the passenger and you pull up to stop, or the driver pulls up to stop and you go to get out of the car, I've noticed it's a force of habit for me to reach down and put the car into park. And it's really awkward when you do that and you're not the driver, especially if it's an Uber driver. Somebody that you don't know that well. And you're sitting there just doing your thing. You get to the place and you're like, oh, I'm here, and you reach over and you put the car into park for them, and they're going to look at you weird. I guarantee it, because I've done it a few times now. So you might want to sit on your right hand or something so you don't do that.
Another good one is getting in on the wrong side of the car, because you're so used to getting in on the other one.
You're like, oh, are you driving?
So there's where's my steering wheel?
I get it.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to returning to New Zealand at some point and connecting with you there over a beer and some mint-flavored lamb potato chips or blue mussels. I remember
actually going to have to go look for those.
You should. Now you're going to see it, right? There's that what they call the reticulated activating system. Once you're aware of something, all of a sudden you're going to see it. But anyway. It was a real pleasure having you on the show. Look forward to connecting with you in the future and working on projects together. Is there anything else that you want to share, or that I should have asked you that I didn't ask, or anything at all that you'd like to share?
No, all good. Thank you so much for having me. It's really awesome to have a chat. I feel like, we could go on for a few more hours, but people probably get tired of me raving.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.